Sewing Circle of the Suffolk Public Library. We're so glad you could join us today for a lesson in embroidery. For this program, we want to give a special thanks to Hilary Leslie for sharing her design with us. Please check out her Etsy page at H. Leslie Designs for this and more beautiful embroidery patterns. Today we will be doing the teapot design in a 5-inch hoop. If you received a kit from the library, you have all the materials that you need. Otherwise, hop onto that Etsy page I mentioned and purchase the pattern, and it'll tell you all the supplies that you need there. This is a great program even for beginner embroiderers like myself. So grab your supplies and let's get started. So to get started, you can see that I've already traced on my design here onto my fabric, and I did that by placing the design onto a window and then using the sunlight to trace onto the fabric. So this was my pattern here, and I used this middle size one, and so you can choose the size that corresponds with your frame. And so we're ready to get started. I have already threaded my needle with the first color I'm going to use. I threaded it with all 6 strands, as you can see there, and I have doubled it up, so I tied the end with both strands together. That is so that I can make lines that are twice as thick, and I can fill in my color a little faster. And looking at our instructions here, we're going to be filling in the main colors first on our teapot using our Satin Stitch. So we're going to be doing the Teapot Body first. And so I'm ready to get started, and I'm going to start by filling in this little circle here at the top. This is the very tip of my teapot. And so I have my darker purple color ready to go. And we will start by bringing our needle in from the bottom, and we're going to make a line at the very top. It's okay to kind of poke around until you find where you want to start. So you can see here I am coming out from the very top. So with embroidery, it's good to do kind of a stabbing approach and then pull straight out. That's one way you can kind of feel where your needle will be. And then I'm going to try to make a straight line. So then I'm going to go down here, just across. And you'll see I have made my first line here. So I'll pull it nice and tight. And like I said, by doubling it up, it makes it a thicker line than it would have if I had a single strand. Now, because I'm filling in a color, I'm going to try to put my needle right beside where I went down and go back up right there. Oops. And so you can see I am just making another line right below that. And then, just like I did before, I'm going to go down right beside where my previous line was. You can see there it's starting to fill in. So by zigzagging back and forth like that, you're going to save the most floss because you're not going to have nearly as much on the back as you see here. So I'm just going to finish filling in there, and then we'll change colors. So now I've completed this first little section, and I'm ready to change colors. And so I'll need to tie off my thread here on the back. And what I'm going to do that is grab just a little bit of this loop here. And then I'm going to use that to tie off, because I don't want to poke it through my fabric like I would typically do with sewing with embroidery, because then it'll show through and it'll make it really lumpy, and we don't want that. So I'm just going to grab that little loop like that and take my snips. I'll trim it off. And then I'm going to also just trim this little extra bit of fuzz here. Try to get as much bulk as possible away. All right, and we've completed our very first section. And so just to make things simple, I'm going to keep the same color, and I'm going to do the next section that's going to require this color, which is going to be this little piece here. So just like I did before, I'm going to keep my double strand, and I'm going to tie my knot. And this time I'm going to do my zigzag back and forth this direction rather than this direction like I did before. If we consult our design here, you can see that the stitches go this way. And I'm going to just continue all the way down this section here. And as you can see, I have finished this little section here now. And just like I did before, I'm going to tie it off on the back. So I'll just grab a little piece of one of those last loops that I did, just kind of loop it through like this, and then it's sometimes helpful to just pull the end of your knot like this so it'll lay flat, just looped through. And I'm going to zoom in just a second so you can see that a little bit. So I tied my knot through, and then I just pulled it, and now I'm going to clip it here so that it won't be too bulky. I'm also going to trim here where I started. All right. And now we have two little sections done already. And so this is going to be the stitch that we use for all of these big body parts, and we're going to start by doing all of that first. And so now I'm going to do this part of my teapot, again using the darker purple color that I've started with here. And this will be a good time to show you how to tie off in the middle section, because sometimes you're going to run out of thread as you go. So I'm going to start up here at the very tip of my teapot. And I'm gonna shape it by giving it a little bit of a spout right there. just to check my work here, you can see that I'm starting to fill in the spout of my teapot here, and I'm running out of thread here on the end, so it's a good place to tie it off and start with a fresh piece. You don't want to make it so short that you can't tie your knot at the end. So, like I did before, I'm going to catch one of those little loops so I can make my knot. And then I'll catch another loop for the tail of it, just so it'll lay flat. It won't create quite as much bulk on the back. And this is another good time to tighten up my fabric a little bit. It's going to get loose as you sew. So periodically, just give it a tug. Make sure it's nice and tight. And then you can thread your needle again and keep going. The idea is to keep about the same tension throughout, so you're not pulling too much or too little, so that way it's a nice even stitch all the way down. Okay, and so you can see I have completed the spout here. And so just so that I stay with the same color for a little bit, I'm going to continue and do this bottom part of my teapot. If you want to, you can start from the top to the bottom and change colors throughout. It's just your personal preference. I'm choosing to use one color at a time. And for this section, I'm going to start with the straightest piece just because that'll make it easiest when I go to create my lines. So I'm going to start from this corner and kind of work my way back. Be careful to put your stitch right beside the line going on this section here. You don't want to overlap there. You want to have a clear line. You also don't want to accidentally poke through a hole that's already there, because that's going to make your stitch not stay put. And then as we're getting sort of towards the top here, we're going to have to account for this little dip here. And so what I'm going to end up doing is kind of dividing this into sections and doing like one little side here and then doing another little side here. So you'll see how I do that here next. And this time I'm going to do this part just to right here. And then I'm going to do another section that goes from there to here. And I'll do that another time or two to fill in the rest of this spot. And you can see here that allowed us to do a little bit of a curve here instead of just a straight line like we started at the bottom. So it was pretty straight, and then we did a little bit of a dip. So I'm going to tie it off, and then we'll do the next section over, and you'll see how we do that again. And this is an even more dramatic dip in this section here. And so now I'll start at the bottom, just like I did with the last section. Always checking your tension at the beginning of a section so that you don't get it too tight. And this time I'm going to fill in the left side first, just because that's convenient to where I left off right here. So I will take it to about right in the middle. And then I'm just going to follow my sketched line up a little bit further so you can see, zooming in a little bit, how I kind of went a little bit to the left of the middle there. And then I'm going to do that just a little bit further. To finish the curve here. And you can see it kind of created our little curve going this way. And so then I can tie it off and go to the other side, or I can just go across to where I left off here in the middle, and that's what I'm going to do to save myself having to tie any knots. So that's going to leave a little bit of a line on the back, but that's fine. We're not going to see the back anyways. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Again, just kind of following your line. As close to the stitch right before as you can. And you can see here, we've done another section. So now that you can see I have filled in all of the light purple parts with our satin stitch, we're now going to do our straight stitches down these lines here with our silver. And so just like it sounds, we're just going to do a straight stitch. So we're going to start at the top. Oh, and by the way, this time I'm only going to have my single strand. I should point that out. So we don't want this part to be super thick, so we're just going to keep this one single. All right. So find the top. It's a little bit hard to do with all those other stitches in there, but a little trial and error. Oh, there you go. And then we'll go down right at the bottom. One long stitch. And again, you want to make sure that your tension is right so it's not pulling too tight. Make adjustments as you need to there. So that's one piece, and then we're going to do that down all four sides like this. And that's all four. So that step is done. So now I'll tie off on the back. And so that gives nice dimension to your design here. You can see those 4 straight stitches that we just did. So now I'm going to use a French knot to put our little roses right here on our joining parts there. So to do that, we use a single strand, and we're going to use the lighter of the 2 bright purples for this part. And so for this, we're going to go up right in the middle of where that rose is going to go. So poke through and pull it up. And then, holding your thread, you're going to wind it around your needle like this. 1 time, 2 times. And then, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see. So I have it wrapped around my needle right here. I'm going to then poke that needle right back down where I came up, like this. And so as you can see, we have a little rose here. And so to save myself from having to tie a bunch of knots over and over again on the back, I'm just going to zip across and keep them connected. So without tying a new knot, I'm just going to come up to the next spot here. And just like I did before, I'm going to hold my thread with my other hand. I'm going to wind it around my needle like this. And then I'm going to poke it right down in that same spot and pull it down. And just like before, I might have to kind of work with it a little bit to get it to pull all the way through like I want it to. Alright. So now we have 2 little roses. So I'll go to the next spot. Do the same thing. Again, hold my piece. Wrap it around. So the first thing we're going to do is the outline of our handle here, and that's going to be in this same darker color that we used on this part of our teapot. So for this part, we're going to use a whipped back stitch. So the first step of this is to start at one end of our handle, and following the line we're going to do a back stitch. So a back stitch is just like I've started it here. You're going to end up with a stitch that makes a solid line all the way around this edge, and you're going to be going in this direction as you go. So you start by poking a stitch length away like this, and then you come back forward where you just left off here. do that again. So stitch length away. And then back forward where you just left off. Just turning your project as you go to give yourself the best angle to work. Especially with a curving line like we have here. It's good to do a short stitch length when you have such a sharply curving line, because then you have more control over the shape of your line. And I'm going to zoom in here for just a second so you can see what this looks like. So you can see it's a fairly solid line all the way around. So we're just going to keep going all the way around. So now you can see I have gone all the way around with my back stitch, and I have the beginning of an outline. Here's where we make it a whipped back stitch. So I left off right here on the front. So what I'm going to do is come back up through one of the holes where I've stitched already. And now I'm gonna catch my loop right here. Let me zoom in so you can see a little bit. And I'm gonna do that again right here. And then right here. And I'm just gonna keep going back through, and this is what makes our line look really connected. Gives it a nice texture. As you can see, it makes it look kind of rote-like as we go. So we're just going to retrace our steps here all the way around. Gives it a really cool finished look. following the line, we're going to do a back stitch. So what you do for a back stitch is just like I've started it here. You're going to end up with a stitch that makes a solid line all the way around this edge. And you're going to be going in this direction as you go. So you start by poking a stitch length away like this. And then you come back forward where you just left off here. And we'll do that again. So stitch length away. And then back forward where you just left off. Just turning your project as you go to give yourself the best angle to work. Especially with a curving line like we have here. It's good to do a short stitch length when you have such a sharply curving line, because then you have more control over the shape of your line. And I'm going to zoom in here for just a second so you can see what this looks like. So you can see it's a fairly solid line all the way around. So we're just going to keep going all the way around. So now you can see I have gone all the way around with my back stitch, and I have the beginning of an outline. Here's where we make it a whipped back stitch. So I left off right here on the front. So what I'm going to do is come back up through one of the holes where I've stitched already, And now I'm gonna catch my loop right here. And I'm gonna do that again right here. And then right here. And I'm just gonna keep going back through, and this is what makes our line look really connected. Gives it a nice texture. As you can see, it makes it look kind of rope-like as we go. So we're just going to retrace our steps here all the way around. And then we are back where we started, so on this last loop. And then you're going to go back down and tie it off on the back. So now I'm going to go in with my satin stitch and fill in the handle just like I did the main part of the teapot. And I'm just going to start on one end and more or less just keep crossing and changing direction with it as I go. So unlike these where I just kind of stayed in one direction, I'm going to let it follow the curve of the handle. And so since I've already shown you how to do that, I'm going to skip that part in the video and we'll get right next to the next step. So now you can see I have completed my teapot and we are ready to do the flower at the bottom. So for the flower, I'm going to start with my leaf, and I have added for myself a middle line to follow because I'm a beginner at embroidery, and I think that'll help me in making my fishbone stitch, which is a different one than we've done so far. So I have my single, my 6 strand, but I'm doing a single one instead of doubling them up, of my sage green color, and I have my knot ready, and I'm going to start at the base of the leaf and I'm going to work my way out to the tip like that. And so I'm going to start right here where the stem is at the middle point. So go ahead and poke it through like that. And now we're going to do a tiny stitch down the middle, like this. Just a small stitch to get started. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you can see. And then the next step is going to be coming out just a little bit beside where that one is. And then going just a little bit further down the middle part. So you can see it's just a little bit wider. And now I'm going to do that very same thing on the other side. So we're going to be alternating left to right. So I'll come up on my left side now, and I'll go just a little further down the middle. And you can see it starting to make a leaf shape ever so slightly. I'll zoom back out so you can see what I'm doing. So again, I'm going to come just beside where I left off on the right side. There we go. Go just a little bit further down my leaf like this. And then we'll do that again on the left side. As you can see, I have continued all the way up and just going back and forth until I reached the very tip, and then I tied it off on the end. So now I'm just going to use my silver again to make my line down the middle using just a regular back stitch. So we're not going to do the whipped one like we did here, we're just going to do the one step, which is the regular back stitch. So I'm going to start here, the base of my leaf, about right here. Go up a little ways and then stitch backwards. Give yourself a little bit of a line. You can see right there. Now we're going to use our green thread again, and we're going to do our whipped back stitch to do the stem here, just like we did on the handle of our teapot. So of course the first step is to just do a back stitch. So we'll start on one end. And we'll go a little bit of a length down for our second stitch. Alright, and now, just like we did before, starting with where we just left off, we will do the whip part all the way back down. Being careful not to catch part of our teapot as we go. Gives us a nice rope-like texture for our flower stem here. Then I will go back down at the end and tie it off underneath. So the last step to complete our picture here is to do the blossom part of our flower. And for this part, we're going to do a whole bunch of French knots, just like we did for our spots here on our teapot. And we're going to be using our two brighter purple colors. So the same one that we used here, as well as the really rich purple one. So I'm just going to do a couple to start with one color, and then I'll kind of alternate between the two as I have to switch. So again, to do a French knot, come up like this. Zoom in so you can see a little better. You're going to hold your thread with your other hand. You're going to wrap it around twice. And then right down where you just came up, you're going to poke back through. Hold it while you pull. And then that was a nice tight little knot there. So I'm going to do that again in another spot. And I'm just going to kind of alternate places where I go. And as I keep adding knot after knot, it'll fill in this little flower here. And they won't be exactly uniform, and that is part of what makes it look like a flower. I'm a beginner at this too, so my knots are going to vary a little bit as I go, and that's okay. And I'm just going to continue to make a bunch of knots here in the different colors, and when I get towards the end here, I'll show you what it looks like. Alright, and so we have a finished design. I think this turned out really great. So if you got a kit from the library, do know that the sketch of the picture on your fabric is done with iron off ink. So if you're like me and you didn't quite stay inside the lines and a little bit of it shows, you can just dab that with your iron gently and that should come right off. So the last step we're going to do to finish our project here is to tidy up our hoop a little bit, because this doesn't look quite finished with our extra fabric. So before we trim anything off, be sure to give it one more good tug. Make sure it's as tight as you can make it, because this is your last chance to pull it tight before you trim everything off. So what we're going to do is, with our scissors, just cut it so that it's a circle all the way around, about evenly. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll show you what to do next. Okay, so I've trimmed this and I'm ready to finish it off on the back. Ideally, it would be better to have a bit more around the edge, but this is about the best I could do to get it even all the way around with the size fabric I had. So that's what we've got for this time. So I have a single strand ready to go, tied off with a knot, and I'm just going to do a running stitch all the way around the edge. So about that far, if you can see here, from the very edge, so not so much it'll fray. We'll just go in and out, pretty wide stitches here this time. Alright, and I have gone all the way around. I'm back to where I started. And now we're going to pull it tight so that it kind of tucks in all the way around. And like I said, it would be a little bit better if I had a slightly bigger piece left over, but we're going to do the best we can with what we've got here. So I'm going to pull it as tight as I can get it all the way around. And then I'm going to tie a knot off right about where I started with my first piece. And this will help it lay down just so you can hang it on the wall or on a shelf or wherever you would like to display your work. So I'll just tie a knot like this. And there you go. Our teapot is all finished and it turned out great. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and please do check out Suffolk Public Library's YouTube channel and Facebook page for more of our sewing videos, as well as H. Leslie Designs on Etsy for more beautiful embroidery designs. Have a great one.